These days, we have a place called the dollar store, and there are several different varieties of the dollar store. But this is the place where you can save money on everyday things, knickknacks, clearance items, liquidations, which is probably why we call it the dollar store. It's a good place to save a buck or two, right? Admittedly, I can poke around in a place like this for hours. But the dollar store is also a sign of inflation if you think about it. We used to have the 5 and dime, but now it's the dollar store. Woolworths. That was the standard of the 5 and dime stores, wasn't it? I remember Woolworths from when I was a kid. They were still hanging around back then. Nancy Griffith once sang in a song that all Woolworth stores around the world smelled the same. She said, they smelled a little bit like popcorn and chewing gum rubbed around on the bottom of a leather-soled shoe. And I remember that smell. I would get one of those free little bags of popcorn if ever my mom brought me with her to Woolworths. And I particularly remember having that popcorn in my hands as we waited around in the back of Woolworths. Turns out that I was tagging along as my mother made payments toward future purchases, something they called layaway. Nowadays, of course, we have credit. You see something you want but don't have the money, and you can get it anyway with credit. We don't have to wait. But we do have to pay interest. Layaway, however, it's like the reverse of credit, isn't it? You saw something you wanted then, and you could have the store take it and set it aside with your name on it, and then you would make payments until you were done. And when you finally paid off whatever you had laid away, it was yours. No interest either, from what I recall. I have a good friend who told me about buying her first stereo on layaway. It was a real beauty, too. It had an 8-track and a cassette deck. So you might make a mixtape for somebody with Peter Frampton and Jim Croce and, I don't know, Cat Stevens. But that was an exercise in delayed gratification. Something we just don't seem to have patience for anymore. Delayed gratification. A process of identifying, desiring, and planning for the future. Think about Christmas shopping in this way, and maybe you do remember it. Parents would put something big on layaway all the way back in August. And they'd budget and sacrifice to make it a reality for their children before December 25th. Layaway. It makes for a great metaphor for faith and spirituality. Delayed gratification. Identifying. Desiring. And planning for the future. Something like people hoping for, dreaming about, expecting God's Messiah. You see that? A time was when there were people doing this, expecting God's Messiah. Several hundred years before Jesus was ever born, generations before his ancestors. The days when the prophets spoke the words of God to hear and ponder and choose to believe if they might. Words like these from the prophet Isaiah. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice cries out, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out. And I said, what shall I cry? All people are grass. Their constancy is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades. When the breath of the Lord blows upon it, surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Get you up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good tidings. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good tidings. Lift it up, do not fear. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. See, the Lord God comes with might, and his arm rules for him. His reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead the mother sheep. This is the future to come, says the prophet Isaiah. On behalf of God, the prophet says that this is the future to identify, desire, and plan for. So make straight his path, prepare the way, comfort my people, good tidings ahead. The days of despair are coming to an end. But that's the trick. There was no need for words such as these, except that the people God was speaking to through the prophet were in despair. I mean, what they had endured up to this point was wretched. I mean, destruction at the hands of their enemies, death, deportation into exile hundreds of miles from their homeland for an entire generation. Probably, and I say this because it might be my attitude, but probably these were people in no place to actually believe good news of a bright future after all of that. And yet, the people were restored to their lives back in Jerusalem. I mean, it was not long after Isaiah preached this very message. The Babylonians who had done all of this to them, they met their match as the new Persian Empire grew and became more powerful. And in the midst of that, the Israelites were allowed to return home. Now, you might recognize these words from Isaiah. A voice cries out in the wilderness. Does it sound familiar? Prepare the way of the Lord. I mean, these are the words that are used to describe John the Baptist, aren't they? Hundreds of years after Isaiah. How is it that the prophecies so long before Jesus, which seem to have been fulfilled when the Israelites returned home, how is it that those prophecies from so long before still carried the weight of promises yet expected? Because the exile did come to an end, not long after Isaiah spoke these words. But generations afterward were still remembering them as if something were yet to happen. It's kind of like Layaway, actually. Salvation on layaway. Now, something glorious did happen those many years before, miraculous even. Freedom, release, rebuilding. At the end of the exile, just as God had promised. And yet it was not a war to end all wars. It did not bring a peace to last forever. A new heaven and a new earth, we didn't see it. There was still hunger, there was still suffering and heartache. And eventually, there was a new terrible set of tyrants to come and oppress Jesus' people. The Romans, the ones who killed Jesus. So in the creative Jewish imagination over the years, these old prophecies always still carried the yet unfulfilled promises of God, that a Messiah is yet to come. That's faith. Now, the trick for us in Advent, I think, is still to live in this kind of layaway spirituality. You see, yes, salvation has come in Jesus Christ. And yes, it is alive in each one of us. It's glorious, miraculous even. Isn't there something more still to come? Isn't there? In a world torn by division, despair, isn't there still more to come? In my own life, in your very own life. Still so much more for God to work on and do and use, isn't there? Because what a joy, what a gift that is. I mean, with God, we get to just keep working on it. Some delayed gratification. We get to keep working on it with a God who just will not give up.